Reddit throwaway for obvious reasons. I'm 30F and my younger sister Lily is 24F. We're not close anymore, and not because of some huge fight or years of petty drama. We just don't exist in each other's lives anymore. Or more accurately, I no longer exist in hers. Not even as a footnote. Let me explain. When I was 18, I got into my dream college, a top-tier out-of-state university. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was close. I had a partial scholarship and my plan was to double major in biology and psychology. I was obsessed with the idea of becoming a researcher, maybe even go into neuroscience. One day it felt like I was finally on track to make something big out of my life. That same week I got the acceptance email. Our dad had a stroke, a massive one. He survived, but it left him with limited mobility and speech issues. He needed around-the-clock care, therapy, meds, everything. Our mom was already working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and now she had to manage doctor appointments and hospital paperwork too. The night before I was supposed to send in my enrollment confirmation, they both sat me down. They said, "Just take a semester off to help out around here, just until things stabilize." It felt like I didn't even get a moment to process what was happening. I agreed. It was supposed to be temporary. At the time, Lily was only 12. She'd just started 6th grade. She was scared, confused, and caught constantly crying. Mom was either at work or driving back and forth to the hospital, so I became the one who got Lily up for school, packed her lunch, helped with homework, and sat with her when she had nightmares. 1 semester off became a year. Then the university said they couldn't hold my scholarship. The deferral fees were too high, and with all the medical bills piling up, we just couldn't swing it. I ended up enrolling at a local community college instead. I commuted from home, worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a grocery store and one at a tutoring center, and handled everything that came with being the fallback adult in the house. I drove Dad to physical therapy twice a week, did Lily's science fair projects, and still tried to pass my own classes in between. I didn't hate it. I loved my family, and I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that we'd bounce back and I'd get my shot again later. I stuck around for all of Lily's big moments. I was the one in the audience at her school plays. I was the one sitting in the parking lot during her soccer practices, rain or shine. I helped her pick out her prom dress, did her makeup, and took pictures. When her date arrived late, I was there when she came home crying from her first breakup, and when she didn't get into her top choice school. By the time I was 21, I had a degree in general psych from the local college. Not what I dreamed of, but it was something. Around the same time, Lily started getting her own acceptance letters. One of them was from a small, expensive private university across the country. Our parents were over the moon. There was no conversation about staying close to home to help like they did with me. "No, we need you here." They told her to go, to spread her wings. I didn't protest. I helped her pack her suitcases, drove her to the airport, and hugged her goodbye like it was the proudest moment of my life. The first few years after she moved, we stayed in touch. Regular calls, long texts, FaceTimes. During the holidays, she came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The first couple of years, I sent her care packages and notes before big exams. But things changed. The texts became shorter, then less frequent, then barely at all. She stopped answering calls. Her Instagram turned into a curated highlight reel. Brunch pics with her roommates, study group selfies, captions about finding her tribe and coming from nothing. No mention of the sister who helped her get through middle school or the one who worked nights so she could focus on school. Then earlier this year, I saw a post on her birthday. A big collage with the caption, "Couldn't have made it without my real sisters," her roommates. She thanked them for raising her and believing in her when no one else did. I wasn't mentioned, not even in the comments. I sat in my car outside work and cried for an hour. That was the moment I realized something. If Lily wanted to rewrite her past and erase me from it, fine. But I wasn't going to pretend it never happened. If she wanted to act like I didn't exist, then maybe it was time she remembered exactly who made her life possible after everything that happened. I let a few days pass before reaching out. I texted Lily asking if she wanted to meet up for coffee when she came back to town next month. She replied a day later, saying she was really busy and might be able to fit me in. That was it. No follow-up, no looking forward to it. I didn't push, I didn't double text. I just sat with it for a bit. Then I remembered her roommate, Tessa. I'd met her once a couple years ago when Lily brought her home for a holiday weekend. We'd only talked briefly, but she seemed nice and wasn't glued to her phone like the others. So I messaged her on Instagram and said hi, just checking in and hoping she was doing well. She replied within minutes, super friendly, and told me Lily was throwing a party next weekend, something about her grad school acceptance and coming full circle. The theme was homegrown, thriving local bar, invite only, cocktail dress code. I checked the calendar. I wasn't invited. Our parents were, though apparently Lily told them she'd already told me about it, so they assumed I was coming. When I asked Mom about it, she looked uncomfortable and said Lily probably figured I was busy with work, since I always am. I wasn't busy that night, and I wasn't about to pretend like I hadn't found out by accident. I cleared my shift the day of the party. I booked a hair appointment and wore a simple but clean navy dress with capped sleeves and a low back, nothing over the top. I added a silver chain I hadn't worn in years and a light spritz of perfume. The kind of look where I could walk into a room and not shrink. I waited until about 30 minutes after the official start time, then pulled into the parking lot. The place is already buzzing. Music spilling out the open windows, people laughing on the patio, servers walking around with trays of finger foods. Tessa spotted me first, near the front. She smiled wide, gave me a hug, and said she didn't know I was coming. Said Lily never mentioned it? I walked in behind her. That's when Lily turned and saw me. She was standing in the center of a group holding a flute of champagne, laughing at something someone just said. As soon as our eyes met, her face froze for a second. Then she forced a smile, waved, and turned her back. I didn't make a scene. I didn't try to follow her around. I got a drink, found a corner near the bar, and spoke to people who were open to it. A few of her friends introduced themselves and asked how I knew Lily. One of them, a tall guy in a green blazer, asked if I was the cousin from the Midwest. I laughed and said no, I was the sister who raised her. The mood shifted instantly. The group got quiet. A few people looked confused. One girl with a butterfly clip in her hair said Lily told them she basically raised herself. No siblings, just a single mom and a whole lot of struggle. I didn't push it. I just said interesting and walked off. About an hour in, the music slowed down and Lily got up to give a toast. She stood on a small platform, thanked her chosen family, and talked about hard work, self-made stories, and how she came from nothing but built everything. Nothing. No reference to any part of her real upbringing, not even a glance in my direction. After the toast, when people started heading to the bar or patio, I walked over and quietly asked if we could talk somewhere for a minute. She hesitated but nodded. We stepped outside into the alley beside the building near the dumpsters. Not glamorous, but it was quiet. I asked why she's been leaving me out of, why she keeps rewriting the story like I was never in it. She said it complicates things, that people don't get it, that mentioning me makes it seem like she didn't do everything herself, and that when she tries to talk about the past, it gets messy. I said I wasn't asking for credit. I just didn't want to be erased. She looked tired or annoyed or both and said, maybe I should stop showing up where I'm not invited. That was it. I went back inside, set my drink on an empty table, and left without saying goodbye. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't slam a door or throw a glass. I walked out the same way I walked in. Quiet, clean, no ripples. But now I'm thinking, maybe staying silent all these years was the problem. Maybe the real story needs to be told, not out of revenge, but because I'm tired of watching my whole life get edited out of someone else's fairy tale. After the party, I stayed quiet for a couple of days. No texts, no follow-up, no talking to anyone about it. Then one night I opened Facebook and clicked Create Post. I hadn't used it for anything personal in years. Just birthdays, the occasional photo, and work updates. This time I typed everything out. I didn't name names, I didn't point fingers. I just told the story the way it happened. The college acceptance I turned down, the years I spent helping at home. The I gave up so the people I loved could keep going. I wrote about the soccer practices, the school plays, the late-night crying sessions after breakups, and how being the stand-in parent wasn't something I asked for, it was just something I became. I ended the post with a sentence I didn't plan ahead of time. If being forgotten was the cost of her success, I paid it gladly. But I won't pretend I was never here. I hit post close. The app, put my phone down. By the next morning, it had over 200 likes and dozens of comments. People I hadn't talked to in years, classmates, coworkers, neighbors from our old street started commenting. Things like, I always wondered why you stayed local, and I remember you being at every school event for your sister. A couple even said they assumed I was Lily's young mom because I was always the one picking her up from school. One comment stood out. Her 8th grade English teacher, she wrote, I always admired how you were there for her. You were the backbone of that family. Thank you for sharing this. Then my aunt, Dad's sister, shared the post on her own page, adding this needed to be said. Proud of you. I didn't tag Lily. I didn't mention her by name, but someone in the comments did. That's when it really started. That evening around 9 p.m., I got a long text from Lily. Not a phone call, just a block of angry words. Accused me of trying to humiliate her. Said I was ruining the image she'd built, claimed I was bitter and jealous and dragging her backward when she was trying to move forward. Said grad school was supposed to be her fresh start, and I was forcing her to relive things she'd already moved on from. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just replied. A fresh start doesn't mean rewriting the past. It means owning it. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice was tight. She said I could have handled things more quietly, that posting publicly was unnecessary, that family matters should stay in the family. An hour later, Dad called too. His voice sounded different, slower, quieter. He said it was about time someone told the truth. Then he thanked me for not pretending anymore. By the weekend, Lily had blocked me on Instagram. She removed me from Facebook too. I wasn't surprised. I didn't tell anyone. But that small action actually brought a weird kind of peace. It felt like the first time in years I wasn't being forced to sit quietly on the sidelines while someone else rewrote my role. Since then, a few more people from our hometown reached out. One woman from church messaged to say she always noticed how I was the one with Lily during holiday services. Another sent me a photo from a school event. I didn't even remember me sitting on the bleachers with Lily in my lap. It wasn't the text from Lily or the call from my mother that stuck with me in the days after the post. It was the picture. The one a woman from church sent me, old and grainy, a low-resolution snapshot of a school gym lit with fluorescent lights and crepe paper decorations, the kind of generic seasonal banner that always said, "Welcome back," or "Spring Fling." In the bleachers, there I was, 17, maybe 18, wearing a sweatshirt too big and jeans with a rip in the knee, hair in a lazy ponytail, one arm slung around Lily, who looked about 6, curled up in my lap with a juice box in one hand and her head resting on my shoulder. The timestamp said 2001. I stared at it longer than I meant to, my thumb brushing the screen, not even blinking. Like maybe if I looked long enough, I'd remember what song was playing, what night that was, what I was thinking when someone pointed a camera in our direction. I didn't remember. There are whole stretches of my early adulthood that feel like that. Not empty, just blurred, like a photograph taken too fast while you're moving. But I knew what that night meant. I knew what that photo meant. It was evidence. Not for anyone else, not for strangers on the internet or relatives looking for a side to pick, but for me. Proof that I was there. I had always been there. It felt strange how powerful it was to be seen by someone who wasn't even trying to make a statement. That woman from church probably didn't even think twice. Just scrolled through her phone, found a photo, sent it. But for me, it cracked something open. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had allowed to disappear over the years. Not just in Lily's story, but in my own. In the effort to be the steady one, the helper, the one who didn't cause trouble or need rescuing. I'd gotten good at stepping into the background and staying there. My job was fine, reliable, stable. My apartment was small, clean, paid for. My days ran on rails, shift, errands, sleep, repeat. I had routines instead of dreams, a calendar instead of a vision board. And for a long time, that felt like enough. But after the post, after the picture, I started asking myself questions I hadn't let surface in years. Not big dramatic ones. Not what if I'd gone to that university. Not what if I'd just said no when they asked me to stay. Smaller questions. Softer. Like, what would my life look like if I didn't measure it against someone else's milestones? What if my story wasn't a cautionary tale, or a footnote, or a sacrifice? What if it was just mine? I started to do small things that didn't make sense to anyone else but felt necessary. I rearranged the furniture in my apartment. I bought a secondhand piano and took a free trial lesson. I went to a museum on a weekday, alone, and spent 2 hours staring at paintings I couldn't pronounce the names of. I called my old biology professor from community college and left a voicemail just to thank her. I didn't expect to call back, but she did. Said she remembered me, said she always thought I'd go further if I ever caught a break. I laughed and told her maybe I had. She paused and said, "Not all breaks come from outside, you know. Some of them we make." I sat with that. I wrote it down. I put it on a Post-it and stuck it to my mirror. Not all breaks come from outside. Some we make. That weekend, I got an email from a girl I used to tutor back when I was working at the Learning Center. She's in grad school now. Said she saw the post because her cousin shared it and she recognized my name. Said she still remembered how I used to make her feel smart, even when she failed tests. That I was the first adult who ever told her being bad at math didn't mean she was bad. She said that one sentence changed how she saw herself, and now she's studying developmental psych. I read her message 3 times and cried quietly into my tea. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that even the life I never chose still carried meaning. That even in the middle of other people's messes, I had managed to give something to someone, maybe even save someone. Maybe in a way, I had saved myself too. A few days later, I went for a walk through the park near my old high school. The bleachers were still there. Newer paint, but same shape. I sat in the top row and looked down at the field. I remembered every soccer practice, every freezing afternoon spent pretending not to be bored, every paper cup of hot chocolate from the vending machine. I remembered how Lily used to run over after practice and hand me her cleats like they were treasure, and I'd carry them while she told me the score like it mattered more than anything else in the world. I wondered if she remembered that, if she even wanted to. I didn't know. Maybe someday she would, maybe not. But that was no longer my weight to carry. What mattered now was that I remembered, that I stopped pretending I didn't matter, that I refused to let my whole life be summarized in footnotes while someone else got the headline. The silence I'd kept for so long wasn't strength, it was survival. And now, I was finally choosing to live out loud, even if the only person listening was me. It's strange what happens when people start looking at you differently, not because you've changed, but because you finally made yourself visible again after years of standing so still they forgot to see you. And what surprised me most in the weeks after the post wasn't Lily's silence or our mother's defensiveness, but the way people around me, coworkers, old neighbors, even the cashier at the pharmacy who recognized my name from somewhere, started treating me like a full person instead. of a background character in someone else's success story. Like they'd been handed a new lens and suddenly realized I'd been there all along. And while none of them said anything especially profound, it was in the quiet things. The way my manager asked if I wanted to lead a new project at work. The way a neighbor left flowers at my door with a card that simply read, "Thank you for saying it out loud." The way a former teacher emailed me a recommendation for a night program in behavioral counseling that I hadn't even applied for yet, but had been thinking about. And maybe that was the difference. Not that my life transformed overnight, but that for the first time in years it felt like mine. Not a borrowed schedule or a survival routine. Not a series of quiet decisions made in service to someone else's potential. And maybe most shocking of all was how easy it became to breathe once I gave myself permission to stop disappearing, to take up space, to speak without bracing for impact. And in that space, I started to notice more of the cracks forming around Lily's carefully built image. Not because I went looking, but because people started bringing them to me. Not maliciously, not like gossip, just quietly, like they didn't know where else to put the dissonance between the girl she presented to the world and the sister they remembered from those years she now edited out of her narrative. And it was a strange feeling, that validation, not satisfying or triumphant, but hollow. Like watching someone win an award for a performance you helped them rehearse, and still, you're not even in the credits. Just another unpaid extra in a scene you didn't know would be recorded. And maybe it would have been easier if I could hate her, if I could channel everything into anger or resentment. But I didn't. Not really. Because under everything I still remembered that small girl who cried herself to sleep the first week of 6th grade, who asked me if Dad was going to die, who clung to me after her first broken heart like I was the only solid thing left in her world. And that memory kept me from burning it all down, from screaming back, from posting more, from going to the press when someone from a local magazine reached out asking if I wanted to do an interview after my post gained traction. Because yes, part of me wanted to keep telling the story, but a bigger part knew that some stories don't need a stage. They just need to stop being secrets. And the truth was, the story was already told. Not just online, but in the way people looked at me now, in the way I looked at myself. And I kept thinking about what Dad said when he called, how it was about time someone told the truth, and how strange it was to finally feel seen by the one person who used to only see me when I was doing something useful. And even that changed something, softened something I didn't know was still hard, because he didn't say much. And he didn't say sorry, but he said thank you. And maybe that was enough. Maybe not for closure, but for something like peace. And so I kept going. Not with a plan, but with small decisions. I applied for that night program, got in, started classes twice a week after work, and for the first time in years, I felt sharp again, like I wasn't just coasting on old resilience, but building something new. And in those classrooms full of people who were all trying to start over in their own quiet ways, I found a kind of belonging that didn't require explanation or apology, and I didn't tell anyone from my family about it. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need their approval anymore, didn't need them to clap for milestones they never saw me chasing. And I stopped checking Lily's socials altogether, stopped tracking her curated victories and her carefully filtered joy. Not out of spite, but because I was done using someone else's life as a benchmark for whether mine had meaning. And around that same time, I ran into one of Lily's old high school friends at a cafe downtown, someone who used to come over after school and eat cereal with us while they did homework. And she recognized me instantly, said she saw the post, said she'd been meaning to reach out, and then she said something I didn't expect. She said, "You always looked so tired back then, but I didn't get it until I got older." And we sat there for a while, just drinking coffee and swapping stories. And when she left, she hugged me and said, "You mattered." Even if she forgot, you mattered. And I don't know why that hit as hard as it did, but I went home and cried, not because I was sad, but because it felt like the wound had finally scabbed over, and not everything that scabs over is ugly. Some things heal messy and strong, and some truths become more solid when spoken gently, not screamed. And even though Lily hadn't reached out again, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't holding my breath or rehearsing responses. I had stopped playing defense. In a game I never agreed to join, and I started writing again, not posts or confessions, just a private document on my laptop where I typed out moments I didn't want to forget. Not the dramatic ones, but the small ones. The nights we ate cereal in silence because Mom was working late. The time Lily made me a birthday card out of notebook paper because we couldn't afford anything else. The way she used to fall asleep in the back seat on the drive home from school, and I'd carry her inside even, when my arms were sore from work. And I wrote these not because I wanted to remind her, but because I didn't want to erase myself from those memories anymore. Because I had spent so long being the keeper of other people's dreams that I forgot my own story was worth remembering. And maybe Lily will never acknowledge it. Maybe she'll go her whole life pretending I was just a background character in a life she built from scratch. But I know the truth. And the truth is, I was the scaffolding, the flashlight, the net. And now that I've stepped out of the shadows, I'm finally seeing that I don't need anyone else to narrate my life. I'm the writer, I'm the witness, and I'm still here, still standing, still building a future where I don't have to be invisible to be good. It's been a strange kind of quiet since then. Not the heavy silence that follows a fight, not the aching pause after something breaks, but the kind that follows acceptance. When you stop waiting for someone to come back and start building around the fact that they probably won't. And the most surprising thing about that kind of quiet is how peaceful it can be once you stop mistaking it for loneliness. Because I'm not lonely, not anymore. I've got my mornings, slow and mine, filled with good coffee and the click of a keyboard while I finish assignments for the certification program. I've got my nights, tired but full, walking home under city lights or reading until I fall asleep with the lamp still on. And in all of that, I found something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. My own rhythm, my own pulse, uninterrupted by someone else's emergency. And it's made me sharper, more present, more capable, not just in the classroom, but in life. And one afternoon after class, one of my professors asked if I'd consider mentoring some of the newer students. Said she thought I had a way of making people feel seen. And I said yes without even thinking, because of course I'd say yes. Of course I'd do for others what I spent my entire 20s doing in the dark. But this time with structure and intention and boundaries that don't leave me empty. And that weekend I had coffee with a young woman in the program, fresh out of undergrad, nervous, uncertain, brilliant in that flickering way people are before they realize they've got fire in them. And she told me she was afraid she didn't belong, that everyone else seemed to have a plan and she was still just trying to prove she deserved to be in the room. And I told her the truth. That the rooms are often built for people who were never expected to question their right to be there. But the ones who belong the most are the ones who build something better after being left out. And she cried just a little. The kind of cry that comes from someone realizing they're not alone. And I held that moment close all week because that, right there, felt like more than enough, more than applause, more than recognition, more than any family toast or social media post could have offered. And still, even with all of that progress, all that grounding, I won't lie. There were nights I still thought about Lily, not out of hope or anger, but out of memory, muscle memory. Really. Like how you can remember the shape of a house even after it's been torn down, and I'd catch myself wondering if she ever told the truth to anyone about what her childhood was really like. If she ever looked at a photo from those years and felt even a flicker of guilt or gratitude or grief. But I didn't stay in that wondering for long, because I had things to do, a life to live, and my world no longer bent itself around the question of whether or not she remembered. And then, out of nowhere, Mom called one night and said Lily was in town, that she'd come back for a few days before starting grad school and there was going to be a dinner, just family, no pressure, but it would mean a lot if I came. And I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the tension she tried to soften with forced casualness, and I told her I'd think about it. Then I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Not out of indecision, but because I was trying to figure out what kind of version of myself I'd have to be if I went. The quiet one, the forgiving one, the one who smiled politely and didn't bring up anything real. And I realized I didn't want to play any of those roles anymore. Didn't want to shrink myself to fit a story someone else had edited, but I also didn't want to avoid life out of old wounds, so I said yes, on the condition that I would show up exactly as I am now, not bitter, not angry, but not invisible either, and the dinner was awkward from the start. Lily sat across from me, barely making eye contact, our parents, overcompensating with forced conversation, and the food was fine, but no one really tasted it. And somewhere between the salad and the main course, Lily made a comment about how hard she'd worked to get where she was, and how some people just didn't understand the pressure, and I felt Mom glance at me, and for a second I thought maybe I'd let it slide. Maybe I'd just nod and let her rewrite the room again, but I didn't. I set down my fork, looked at her, and said, "Pressure's not the same as sacrifice." And the table went still, and she looked at me like she wanted to say something sharp. But instead she said, "I didn't mean it like that." And I said, "Maybe you didn't, but you still said it." And I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I didn't make a scene. I just left the truth on the table like a napkin, folded and undeniable. And for the rest of the meal, no one really said anything else. And when I left, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. Like I had finally walked through the last shadow and come out clean on the other side. And that night, I wrote another entry in my document. Not a post. Not something I planned to share. Just something for me. You don't have to be angry to be clear. You don't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes telling the truth is the only closure you'll get. And sometimes it's the only one you need. It was a week after that dinner. The kind of week where everything on the outside looked ordinary. Work, class, errands, repeat. But something underneath had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name yet. Like my life had been resting on a crooked foundation and someone had finally leveled it without warning. And I found myself moving through each day with a little more steadiness, a little less bracing for something to snap. And then, on a Thursday night just before midnight, I got a text. From Lily, just 2 words. "Can we?" followed by nothing. Like the second half of the sentence got stuck in her throat or her pride or her thumb. And I stared at it for a full minute before replying, "Tomorrow after 5, cafe on 8th, no filters." And she replied with just a thumbs up. And I felt nothing, not fear, not dread, just a kind of internal readiness I didn't expect. Like my body knew this wasn't about reconciliation or revenge. It was about release. And when I walked into the cafe, the next day she was already there, tucked into the corner like she didn't want to be seen, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, Her posture folded in on itself like she was trying to take up less space. And for a second, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sympathy, not softness, just the recognition of someone who hadn't figured out how to live without a script. And when I sat down, she didn't say anything at first, just stared into her drink. So I waited, calm, not eager, and eventually she said she'd read my post again, the full thing this time, not just the screenshots people had sent her. And I nodded, waited, let the silence stretch. And she said she didn't know what to say because everything she thought she knew about those years was different now. And I told her no, it wasn't different. It was just inconvenient. And she flinched a little at that, then said something I didn't expect. Something small and sharp and oddly sincere. She said, "I didn't think you'd still care." And I said, "I didn't think you'd forget." And there it was. The whole thing in 10 words. Everything we hadn't said in years. The split, the erasure, the loss, the choice. And she looked like she wanted to argue. Like she wanted to tell me how hard it had been for her too. How she'd struggled with guilt or confusion or some watered-down version of accountability. But she didn't say any of that. She just said, "I guess I needed to believe I did it all alone." And I nodded again, because I already knew, and she asked if I hated her, and I said no, because I didn't. I didn't hate her, I just didn't make room for her anymore. And that was the part she didn't understand. That forgiveness wasn't the same as access. That letting go didn't mean leaving the door open, and she asked if we could start over, and I told her I wasn't interested in going backward, that if she wanted to know me now, she'd have to meet me where I am, not where she left me. And she didn't reply to that. Just stared down at her hands, and we sat there in silence until she said she was sorry. And this time it didn't sound like a performance or a defensive reflex. It sounded like a fact, like something she'd been afraid to say out loud in case it collapsed the whole version of herself she'd built, and I said thank you. Not because it fixed anything, but because I wanted her to know I heard it. And when we parted ways that day, I didn't look back, and she didn't try to hug me, and there was no promise of brunch or phone calls or holidays, just two people walking away from a conversation that neither of us knew how to have until we had it. And when I got home that night, I didn't write about it, didn't post about it, didn't share it with anyone. Because some things don't need witnesses, some things are just for the weight they lift. And in the days that followed, I found myself waking up lighter, breathing deeper, focused again on what I was building, not what I'd lost. And it was around that time that my professor pulled me aside after class and said the department wanted to nominate me for a regional award, something for students balancing work and academic excellence while contributing to community growth. And I didn't cry when she told me. I didn't downplay it or deflect it. I just smiled and said thank you. And then I went home and emailed my recommendation letters, wrote my statement, and sent everything in without once asking myself if I deserved it. And that weekend I walked past the old school where Lily used to have her soccer games, and the field was empty, grass cut, bleachers quiet, but I could still see us there, her running, me clapping, the echo of a life where I existed only in service to someone else's future. And I whispered a kind of goodbye, not to her, but to that version of me who thought love meant disappearance. And then I walked on, the sound of my own footsteps finally louder than any memory trying to pull me back. I didn't tell anyone when the award came through, not at first. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't want the moment to become someone else's narrative. Didn't want it filtered through a phone call with my mother, or turned into a quiet congratulations, followed by a critique about how I should have let Lily present it, or wear something softer to the ceremony. So I let it be mine. Just mine. And when I stood on that stage in a room full of faculty, students, and strangers clapping, for something they would never fully understand, I felt something loosen inside me. Something old and tight and stretched too far for too long finally giving way. Not with a snap, but with the gentle shift of something healing. Something finding its rightful place. And the woman introducing me read from the bio I submitted. The degrees, the work, the community impact. And then added something I hadn't written. She's not just a student, she's a foundation, and she's helping others build stronger futures because of it. And I stood there in heels that didn't hurt, in a dress I chose for me, in a body that had learned how to carry itself after years of being bent in half for other people's comfort. And I took the award with a steady hand, smiled into the camera flashes, and then went home alone to my quiet apartment where a bottle of wine and a clean kitchen counter waited for me. And I sat down and exhaled, not relief, not pride, just presence. Full, intact, finally undivided. And I thought about how many versions of me it took to get here, how many years I spent being useful instead of visible, how long I allowed loyalty to replace identity. And I felt no bitterness, just a soft kind of grief for every version of myself that went unseen, and maybe that's what real healing feels like. Not justice, not apology, just recognition that you are no longer standing in the same place where the wound happened. And later that night, I opened my laptop and began to write again. Not for the blog, not for the document hidden in folders named MISC and Archive, but something new, something open, something for others to read, and I called it The Shadow Sister, and I wrote the opening line with hands that didn't shake. This is not a story of resentment. It's a story of record, and in the weeks that followed, it found its way to people I'd never met, Women who said they finally had words for what it meant to hold a family together without being held in return. Daughters, who stayed when brothers got to leave. Siblings who mothered without being called mothers. Entire generations who sacrificed because no one thought to ask if they wanted more. And the responses weren't loud, but they were steady, consistent, the kind of ripple that builds into tide. And one day, months later, I got an email from someone at a nonprofit that supports caregivers pursuing higher education, and they wanted to partner. Use my writing as part of their workshop curriculum, possibly collaborate on a grant to expand support for women like me. And I said yes without hesitation, because if there was ever going to be meaning in what I gave up, then this was it. Not in being acknowledged by the ones who forgot me, but in building something that could not be forgotten, something bigger than me, rooted in truth instead of silence. And I no longer needed Lily to say thank you. No longer needed my mother to apologize for the years she turned her head and pretended not to see what I was giving up. No longer needed anyone to rewrite the past with cleaner margins. I had written my own version now. One without redaction. One where I existed in every frame. And maybe the most surprising part of it all was how peaceful it felt to simply let the rest go. Not with anger, but with clarity. With the knowledge that I did not need anyone to carry the truth with me in order for it to still be true. And the last time I saw Lily was at a family gathering, a cousin's baby shower, where we exchanged a nod across a crowded room and nothing else. No words, no weight, no wounds reopened. Just two women who had once shared a home, a history, a hallway of doors that opened for only one of them. And I left early that day, not out of discomfort, but because I had plans. A workshop to lead, a call with a student mentee, a quiet evening with myself. And I walked away not as the sister who stayed, not as the girl who gave up her dream, but as a woman who finally understood that legacy isn't what others remember you for. It's what you refuse to forget about yourself. And that no matter who tells the story, the dinner speeches, the curated posts, the birthday collages, I will always know the truth. And that is enough.